Hi, everybody. Brad Truax here from Eastman's Woodlands and Wildlife Committee. And today we're going to talk about hickory trees. Somehow, hickory trees escaped our previous presentation on the deciduous trees of Eastman. And that's probably because I've never seen a hickory tree here at Eastman. But we do have some hickory trees here in New Hampshire, so it's worthwhile hearing about them. Hickories are members of the walnut family, and they're uniquely native to North America. There are a variety of hickory trees here in New Hampshire: the shagbark, the pignut, the mockernut, and the bitternut. Really, only the shagbark and the bitternut are commonly seen here in New Hampshire. And bitternut hickory trees, also called yellowbud hickory, are particularly abundant along the Connecticut River Valley. And very interesting thing, similar to oak trees and beech trees, hickory trees do have a masting cycle. And that means they produce massive bumper crops every few years, followed by some leaner years. So hickory nuts are an incredibly energy-rich food. Again, they have very high fat protein content, and they have lots of B vitamins and minerals like manganese. Again, a typical dried hickory nuts have 18% carbohydrates, 13% protein, and 64% fats. So particularly the fat content is very useful for wildlife. And actually, the oil from hickory nuts has been used in a number of different ways. So how do we identify hickory trees? Well, there's several things that help us identify it. The branch and bud pattern is alternate. The leaf pattern is compound. The bark is variable depending upon the species. And the flowers are typical long, droopy catkins. And the fruit, obviously, are hickory nuts. So the shagbark hickory, they are deciduous trees. They can grow up to heights as high as 100 feet. And the branches have an alternating pattern. The leaf pattern is compound, typically with five leaflets, although sometimes they might have three or seven leaflets. And the leaves are long, narrow, very finely serrated, and they turn a brilliant golden yellow in the brown. I'm sorry, brilliant golden yellow in autumn. And the bark is gray brown. It's smooth when they are young, but as they age, they develop scales and start to peel, and that leads to the classic shaggy look that we'll talk about. The male flowers are greenish, long-stemmed catkins. The female flowers are very short stalks, and the fruits, the nuts are 1 to 1.6 inches long. They're surrounded by a hard green quartered shell. So here's the leaf pattern. Once again, typically five leaves. And again, usually the basal leaves are somewhat smaller than the outer leaflets. And they're usually 3 to 8 inches long, the longest one being about 8 inches. And once again, the upper leaves typically are bigger than those at the base. And the leaf edges, if you look here, are very finely serrated. And once again, they turn a brilliant golden yellow in the fall. The shagbark hickory, obviously, the bark is the hallmark of the shagbark. Once again, when they're young, it's relatively smooth, kind of a gray brown. But as they age, they develop these scales and the bark starts to peel. And it creates this very classic shaggy look. The male flowers of the shagbark hickory are these long green catkins. The female flowers I don't see here, but they have very short stalks. And the fruit of the shagbark hickory is 1 to 1.5 inches long. It's an edible nut. It's got this very hard, bony shell. It's a thick green four-section husk that turns dark and splits off at maturity in the fall. And the nuts are edible and they're actually quite tasty. And the nuts, once again, are very energy and calorie dense. They're high in fat, protein, and B vitamins and minerals. So they're very valuable, particularly for wildlife. The bitternut hickory, these are also deciduous trees that grow best in moist valleys. So here in New Hampshire, they're found mostly along the Connecticut River Valley. They're somewhat fast growing and they can reach heights of 60 to 90 feet. And they're intermediate to intolerant of shade. The branches have an alternating pattern, and the leaf pattern is compound, 6 to 12 inches long, and they have 7 to 10 lance-shaped, finely toothed leaflets. So they tend to have more leaflets than most of the other hickories. And the leaves are dark yellow-green above and kind of a paler color below. And in winter and spring, they have very unique sulfur yellow buds. We'll show you a picture of those in a minute. The bark is kind of a silvery gray. It's smooth in the younger trees and in the older ones. And the bark has a sinewy, crisscrossing or wavy interlace network of shallow furrows and flat ridges. So they're almost has a smooth pattern. And the male flowers are yellow-green drooping catkins, usually in groups of three. The female flowers are smaller, short spikes that are usually at the end of a twig. So again, the fruit is kind of globe-shaped. It's 1 to 1.5 inches long. It's green when it's immature and tends to be a reddish-brown when ripe. And as the name implies, these nuts are actually quite bitter. They may be solitary or in groups of twos or threes. And they don't, typically bitter nuts don't begin seed production until they're almost 30 to 40 years old. So once again, that's similar to beech nut trees, which we've seen don't produce any nuts until they're about 40 years old. And once again, like oaks and beech trees, hickory trees do have this typical masting cycle. And for the bitternut hickories, they'll have a good seed crop every 3 to 5 year intervals. So here are the leaves of the bitternut hickory. Once again, they're typically 7 leaflets. Once again, the ones at the base tend to be much smaller than the ones that are out here. And again, the leaves are kind of a dark yellow-green above. They're paler below. And they turn a very distinct bright golden yellow in the fall. And once again, in winter and spring, if you see the buds, they have this very unique silver yellow, sulfur yellow color, very distinctive. This is showing the catkins. The male catkins are drooping, long green drooping. They tend to occur in groups of 3, and they usually arise before the female flowers do. The female flowers are smaller and they're short spikes, usually at the ends of the twigs. And these flowers tend to produce a large amount of pollen in the spring. They're one of the biggest pollen producers that we see. So again, the fruit tends to be a globe-shaped nut, usually 1 to 1.5 inches long. Again, they're green when they're immature. They tend to be a kind of a reddish brown when they're ripe. And as the name implies, they're very, very bitter. And they may be solitary or in groups of 2 or 3, like we see here. And once again, these nuts, like all the other hickory nuts, are very energy and calorie dense, and they have a very high fat content, a good amount of protein, and lots of B vitamins and minerals. Once again, the bark of the bitternut hickory is much smoother. Again, you do have a lot of crisscrossing or waving interlaced network of shallow furrows and flat ridges. And it stays fairly smooth throughout life. It never does peel or resemble the bark of the shagbark hickory. And this is what they look like in the fall. Very beautiful. They have a distinct bright golden yellow color in the fall. And while this photo is of a bitternut hickory, most of the hickories are very colorful in the fall, usually with very bright yellow standing out. The mockernut hickory is actually the most abundant of all the hickories, but we don't see many of these in New Hampshire. They're typically found in dry upland woods or rocky slopes and ridges. and they can reach heights of anywhere from 65 to 100 feet. The branches do have an alternating pattern, and the leaves are compound structures, and they may have 5 to 9 leaflets, usually about seven being the most common. And they have velvety, densely hairy undersides and a spicy orange peel scent when they're crushed. So that's kind of distinctive. And once again, they turn a vibrant, bright yellow in the fall. And the terminal winter buds are very large. They're broadly egg-shaped and covered with light tan hairs. And some people have said they look like Hershey Kisses. We'll show you a picture of those in a minute. The nuts of the mockernut hickory are large, very thick-shelled seeds, and they're known for their very sweet, oily nut meat. Once again, they're very rich, sweet, and both energy and calorie dense. And they have a very high fat content. There's actually about 200 calories per ounce to the mockernut nuts. And they're a very important source of food for wildlife, but they're rarely harvested for human consumption, mainly because of the small kernels and their extremely hard shells. So this is showing the leaves, once again, a compound leaf structure, usually 7 leaves. Once again, the basal leaves leaflets tend to be much smaller than the outer leaflets. And they have a velvety, densely hairy undersides, which you don't see very well in this picture. And the terminal winter buds are very large. They're broadly egg-shaped, and they're covered with some thin tan hairs. And once again, people say they look like a Hershey Kiss. And I guess you can kind of see here that does look like a Hershey Kiss. And the mockernut nuts are large, thick shells, and they're known for their sweet, oily nut meat. They're really golf ball sized, anywhere from 1/2 to 3 inches long, and they have an extremely hard shell. You could probably hit these like a golf ball. And the nuts, once again, are very rich. They're sweet and have lots of calories, and they're good for producing energy. The bark of the mockernut hickory is light and dark gray, and they have very distinct interlacing ridges and deep furrows that create kind of an attractive crisscross pattern or net-like pattern. So much thicker ridges and deeper furrows than we see with most of the other hickories. And it's much coarser than the bark of the bitternut hickory. But once again, it doesn't peel or resemble the bark of the shagbark hickory. The pignut hickory was actually named by early settlers because wild hogs were often seen eating its nuts. It's only occasionally seen here in New Hampshire, mainly down at the southern border. And typically they grow to about 50 to 90 feet tall, but they can reach as high as 120 feet. And they're known for a straight trunk, a narrow crown, and very distinctive yellow fall foliage. And once again, the leaves are compound, typically with 5 lance-shaped leaflets, sometimes as many as 7, and they turn a bright yellow in the fall. The twigs are slender, often reddish brown and smooth. And the terminal buds have been described as looking like ice cream cones. And the bark is smooth and gray, and it develops the very shallow crisscrossing ridges as they age. And its nuts are pear-shaped with a very thin husk that splits only part way. So here is the leaf pattern, typical compound leaf pattern, usually 5 hairless leaflets, and they're very finely toothed. And the terminal leaflet, once again, is the largest. And the twigs are slender and reddish. So you see kind of a grayish, or I'm sorry, a reddish purplish color here. And these terminal buds have often been described as looking like ice cream cones. I'm not sure about that, but clearly they're distinctive compared to the previous terminal buds that we've seen. The pignut hickory, the bark develops these shallow, crisscrossing ridges as they age, but it never peels or resembles the shagbark hickory. But very characteristic of the pignut hickory are these pear-shaped nuts. The shell is very smooth, it's unribbed, and it measures about an inch in diameter. And unlike the other hickory species, the thin green husk only splits halfway down when it matures in autumn. And once again, the nuts are very nutritious. So, what's the value of the hickories for wildlife? Well, they're a great source of calories and energy and nutrients for many different wildlife species. Though the nuts are hard to crack, they are a worthwhile food source for a variety of wildlife. Squirrels are probably the biggest consumers, but wild turkeys, some woodpeckers, and some other birds can actually crack the shells and eat the nuts. And white-tailed deer, foxes, raccoons, chipmunks, and mice rely on the nuts that have fallen to the ground. And there are many Lepidoptera species, particularly the hickory tussock moth, the luna moth, and the brown-tailed moth, that use hickory as a food plant. Hickories do have other value. Once again, the hickory nuts make a great snack for some, except those are the bitter nut, which are bitter. And the nuts also produce oil and a nutty, buttery taste that some say might compete with olive oil. Neville Shute, who's one of Sullivan County's foresters, notes that the oil is very high in very healthy oleic acid, and he actually hopes that it'll become a staple food available at an affordable price, kind of an alternative to olive oil. The oil used to be formerly used in lanterns as well. And the hickory wood is hard, stiff, and dense, and very shock resistant. So it's often used in tool handles, broom handles, bows, walking sticks, drumsticks, and even wood flooring. And formerly, it used to be used in baseball bats and lacrosse sticks. Now, baseball bats are still mostly made of ash, and lacrosse sticks now are no longer made of wood. And hickory is also valued as a firewood, tends to burn very clean, and it has the highest BTU rating of all the eastern hardwoods. And it also makes very good charcoal. And cooking with hickory tends to add flavor to many barbecued foods. So that's a little bit about hickory trees. You probably won't see them here at Eastman, but you may see them in other parts of New Hampshire. So once again, it's another a good deciduous tree to think about when you're talking about the deciduous trees here in New Hampshire.